The first thing people noticed about Ernesto was the way he carried himself, quiet, careful, almost invisible. In the small town where he lived, people knew him as the carpenter who worked behind the old hardware store. His workshop sat at the edge of a dusty road, a narrow building with cracked windows and a crooked wooden door that creaked whenever the wind pushed against it. Inside, the air always smelled of fresh-cut pine and varnish. Every morning before sunrise, Ernesto unlocked that door. He was a man in his late 50s with weathered hands and deep lines across his face, the kind that only years of hard work could carve. His hair had begun to gray, though he kept it trimmed neatly beneath a worn cap. He never spoke much. He preferred the rhythm of his tools, the steady rasp of sandpaper, the quiet knock of a hammer, the hum of a small electric saw. To most people, Ernesto was simply the carpenter who repaired chairs and built kitchen tables. But there was something about him no one really knew. Every evening after the town quieted down and the last customer had left, Ernesto closed the workshop door, turned off the bright lights, and sat alone on a small wooden stool beside the window. Then he sang, not loudly, not for anyone to hear, just enough for the music to exist. His voice floated through the dusty room like something fragile and rare, weaving through the scent of wood shavings and old tools. It carried warmth, sorrow, and a depth that seemed too big for such a small space. But there was never an audience. No applause, only the quiet night and the faint glow of the street lamp outside. Ernesto had once dreamed of singing in front of people. When he was young, music had filled his life like sunlight. He used to sing at small gatherings, family celebrations, even church events. His voice had been strong then, full of hope. But life has a way of reshaping dreams. When his father passed away, Ernesto inherited the tiny workshop along with a mountain of debt. His younger siblings needed help, his mother needed support, and the town needed a carpenter more than it needed another dreamer. So Ernesto picked up his father's tools and put away his music. Years passed. Tables were built, doors were repaired, cribs were crafted for newborn babies, and coffins were quietly assembled for funerals. Through it all, Ernesto worked, and sang only when no one was listening. One afternoon, a young woman named Lila stepped into his shop. She was new in town, a music teacher who had recently moved into the small yellow house across the street. She had come looking for someone to fix an old rocking chair her grandmother had left behind. Ernesto greeted her politely and examined the chair. "It'll take a couple of days," he said softly. "That's fine," Lila replied. "I'm in no rush." As she turned to leave, she noticed something unusual resting against the wall behind him. An old guitar. Its wood was worn, its strings slightly rusted, but it had clearly been cared for. "You play?" she asked. Ernesto paused. "Not really," he said. But Lila noticed the hesitation. "Looks like someone plays," she smiled. Ernesto only shrugged and returned to sanding the chair. 2 evenings later, Lila returned to pick it up. The sun had already set, and the street outside was quiet. When she reached the door of the workshop, she noticed the lights were dim. Then she heard it, a voice, soft at first, but unmistakably beautiful. Lila froze. The singing drifted through the slightly open window, rich and full of emotion. It wasn't the kind of voice you expected to find hidden in a dusty carpenter's shop. It was the kind that could fill a theater. Carefully, she stepped closer. Inside, Ernesto sat on his stool with the old guitar resting across his knee. His eyes were closed. He wasn't performing. He was remembering something. The song carried a gentle sadness that wrapped itself around every word. It sounded like the story of a life lived quietly, of dreams folded away but never truly gone. Lila stood there for nearly 3 minutes before Ernesto noticed her. He stopped immediately. "Oh," he said, startled. "I didn't realize anyone was there." "You sing like that," Lila whispered, "and you're working as a carpenter." Ernesto looked down at the guitar. "It's nothing," he replied. But Lila shook her head. "It's not nothing." Over the next few weeks, Lila kept visiting the workshop. Sometimes she brought small repairs just to have a reason to stop by. Other times she simply brought coffee. And every once in a while, after some gentle convincing, Ernesto would sing. The more she listened, the more certain she became. The world needed to hear him. One evening she finally said it. "There's a talent show in the city next month," she told him. Ernesto nearly laughed. I'm too old for that. You're not. I'm a carpenter. You're also a singer. He shook his head. People don't come to hear someone like me. Lila leaned forward. They will once they do. For days, Ernesto tried to ignore the idea. But it stayed with him. Every time he sang in the workshop, he imagined something different, a room full of people listening. Not politely, silently, truly hearing him. 3 weeks later, Ernesto boarded a bus for the city. The theater hosting the audition was enormous compared to anything he had ever seen. Bright lights flooded the stage, and hundreds of people waited nervously in line. Most were young, confident, dressed like performers. Ernesto stood out immediately in his simple work shirt and worn boots. Some contestants glanced at him and whispered. One young man chuckled. Did the carpenter get lost? He joked. Ernesto pretended not to hear. When his turn finally came, he walked slowly onto the stage. 3 judges sat behind a long table beneath glowing spotlights. The audience murmured quietly. The host leaned toward him. Name, Ernesto. And what do you do, Ernesto? I build furniture. A few scattered laughs echoed across the room. Interesting, the host said with a smile. And today you'll be singing. Ernesto nodded. The microphone felt unfamiliar in his hands. The lights were blinding. For a moment, he considered walking away. Then he thought about the workshop. The quiet nights. The songs no one had ever heard. He closed his eyes and began. The first note was soft. So soft that a few people in the crowd leaned forward just to hear it. But then his voice opened. Warm, powerful, honest. The laughter disappeared almost instantly. By the second verse, the room had grown completely silent. Ernesto didn't perform like someone chasing applause. He sang like someone telling the truth. Each line carried years of quiet living. The sacrifices, the patience, the small hopes that never quite faded. The judges stopped writing. One of them slowly removed his glasses. By the time Ernesto reached the final note, something extraordinary had happened. No one moved. The room remained silent for nearly 4 seconds. Then the audience stood up. The applause exploded across the theater like thunder. People who had laughed minutes earlier were now wiping tears from their eyes. One of the judges leaned forward. Ernesto, she said softly, where have you been hiding? Ernesto gave a small smile. In my workshop. The performance spread across the internet within days. Millions watched the video of the quiet carpenter whose voice had silenced an entire theater. Comments poured in from around the world. Some called it the most honest performance they had ever heard. Others said it reminded them that talent can live anywhere, even in the quietest corners of life. But Ernesto didn't change much. When he returned to town, he unlocked his workshop the same way he always had. He still built chairs. Still repaired doors. Still sanded tables until the wood felt smooth as glass. The only difference was that sometimes, in the afternoon, people would stop by just to say hello. And every once in a while, someone would ask him to sing. When he did, the entire room would fall silent. Just like that night on the stage. Because Ernesto the carpenter had never really been invisible. The world had simply been too loud to notice, until he sang.